Sorry, I can everybody hear me okay? You can hear me? All right, great. Well, welcome back. Glad to have a few folks back. 2 years now, haven't seen faces in person other than the board and, you know, a few of our officers, so it's great to see actual beekeepers in place and seats and in the Ag Center for the most part. It's been a learning process for all of us, and I do appreciate y'all's patience. It's not easy talking to a camera lens day in and day out and not realizing that there's folks on the other end of it. And for the most part, I feel like beekeeping is a hands-on hobby as it is. So we're thankful that you're here. Thank you for coming out, even though we're still in the middle of this coronavirus situation. We hope that things do subside a little bit quicker, sooner than later, and we're able to get back in person fully. And then we can get back involved in our apiaries and back involved on our trips and things and just club activities as a whole. So again, thank you for making the trip out and being brave, and we appreciate it. And we'll do the best we can to keep you safe while you're here. So with that being said, here we'll get into some club activities, what the club business is, how things are going. So far so good. Everything's been doing great. We've this month we've added a official position to our club. I do want to mention that we have added a club apiary manager. It is now an official club position. We felt it is important with the growing of our apiaries that we have somebody in place that is on the board, reporting to the board, and is giving us that source of contact that we need to ensure that our apiaries are growing and is a good place for our young students and new beekeepers to come and learn. So we've been building that up, and guys, I don't know if you've been able to put a face with it if you don't see him on a regular basis, but it's John Converse. Yeah, John, raise your hand. If you don't mind, give him a round of applause too. He's done a lot for us, and for those of you who are new or may not have been involved in much of the club activities while we were during Corona, he has managed our apiary beautifully. If I could say anything, I think we're up to like 9 hives now. And guys, going from the small amount that we've had, I think we started out with 5. John, what was the actual number? 4. We started with 4 this year, and we've expanded up that quickly. So he's done a great job. I was out there for the mite counts. Almost 0 mite counts, didn't have to do any treatment. So if you're looking for a guy that knows how to manage some bees, talk to John. He gave a wealth of advice. He came and looked at my hive the other day, and he did a fantastic job. So don't let him downplay it either. So.
You might want to mention his activity with the 4-H.
Yep, absolutely. And John has been the lead guy on, getting us more involved with our 4-H programs. That's something we hope to expand in the next few months. Thank you, Brandon. And he's done a lot of work with programs of work with the Ag Center, as well as work with 4-H students as well. And for those of you who are interested, our plan is to have what we call a Fun the Sunday. I believe it's a summer program for our 4-Hers, and they'll come out, they'll get hands-on experience here at our apiaries. And the next thing, in part that has happened is we are in the process of receiving a grant to purchase bee suits for our club apiaries, and that will be used for our 4-H students. So that's a big deal to us. That gets young beekeepers involved early. They get in hands-on experience. They learn. That helps beekeeping as a whole, and we're super excited about that. And we've got a beautiful place set up over here for them to come and do that activity and that learning that they need to. And what our hopes are too is that once they've graduated from Al's Bee School, they'll have what they need, and then they can come right out, get that hands-on experience, and be involved in our club. So again, thank John when you see him. I'm gonna really sell him up. He hasn't had a moment in the sun since we've been back in the meeting, but he also did a great job with putting together our shed out here behind the Ag Center. If you get a chance, maybe when you get here at the next meeting or after this meeting, if it's still light outside, go and check it out. It's beautiful. It's painted. It looks great. It's on great. It's a good color. It blends well with the Ag Center, and it's a good addition to our club. It's a storage building that gives us places to put our beekeeping equipment, paint, anything we need to take care of that apiary out there. So once again, thank you, John, for everything you've done this year. We're very appreciative of it. All right. And John, while John took care of it, that was donated to us, by the way. So that was nothing out of the Bee Club's pocket, and which was a tremendous, tremendous donation from Bayer, and who headed that was Jim Dempster. Jim, if you don't mind just raising your hand, I'd appreciate that. Big deal, you know, that's serious, guys. That's a huge asset to our club. So thank you for doing that. And also touching on Jim has brought sugar shaker jars in the back. You know, so you know it's my treatment time, and he has said that everyone can grab one of those on your way out after the meeting tonight. So if you need to know what those are, when you're checking your mites, if you're doing a sugar shake, you put your sugar and your bees into this jar, and then it has a mesh lid on the top of it, so that way you can shake out the mites and out the sugar and see if you need to treat or not. And so, vital part to beekeeping, and we are very appreciative that he has donated those. So if you get a chance, tell him thank you. That's a great piece of equipment to have. So I think I've said all my things. You know, I've touched on a little bit of everything, but not to get too long-winded, we hope to continue going back in person here soon. But for the most part, I think that's it. And to keep myself from talking too much, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our speaker. And in the line that I'm on of thanking folks, got the speaker tonight is Guy Collins. He comes from Cotton Pollination, and Guy has donated a package of bees to us, guys, and that's expanded our apiary out. We've got another hive out there. From what I understand, it's doing well. We installed that package on Thursday. We're very appreciative of that. You know, that goes a long ways. You've heard of the ways, 4-H kids, new students. So we're very appreciative of it. And he's going to present to us today on cotton production as it relates to beekeeping. So, if you don't mind, give him a hand. This is Guy Collins. I think you can clip this to your shirt, and you can just put it right on there. And do you know if the clicker works? Or? Yeah. Okay.
All right, can everybody hear me okay? Yes. All right. Pleasure to be with you tonight. As he suggested, I'm going to talk about cotton production as it relates to beekeeping. And many of you may not know me, but my day job that funds this bee addiction that I have, I work for NC State University, and I am the cotton specialist, the extension specialist. So what I do is applied research with growers to answer directed questions and production problems that they have. And I'm also a beekeeper, so I'm right at the intersection of these two concepts, which is what I'm going to talk about tonight. Let's see here.
Oh, there you go.
There we go. All right, so I've been keeping bees in some regard for going on 15 years now. My father was a hobbyist beekeeper. We had anywhere from 2 to 6 or 7 colonies at any given time. He basically collected his own honey and that sort of thing. 2, going on 3 years ago, I made the big leap into the commercial side of things, which is a whole different ballgame. This is my apiary, as you see there. So right now I resell packages, I make all my own woodenware and things of that nature. My ultimate goal is to have predominantly Carolina-raised newts with local queens. Well, that's my shop, just showing them the packages and all our woodenware. I went and got another load of lumber today for our next sale that's coming up. And last year I started raising queens, and that's a different challenge in itself, but was successful despite a fairly challenging year in many regards this past year. So far this year, things are going pretty well. So, switching gears a little bit to talk about cotton, which is grown here in North Carolina, predominantly in the coastal plain region, and we're kind of right on the edge of it. So there is some cotton production in this area, a little bit further west, maybe towards Clayton. That tends to be the line where you don't see much anymore until you get to maybe Albemarle, up into Piedmont, those areas. There's some cotton up there. So most of it, I'd say 90% of it is in the coastal plain region. There are a lot of beekeepers that interface with cotton on purpose or not on purpose. And they're a very good marriage in the right context if it's managed appropriately, and that's what a lot of what I want to talk about tonight. So first and foremost, and I'm mainly going to focus on growth and development of cotton and when that might influence bees and beekeeping to our advantage. But it's important to understand that cotton is an indeterminate perennial plant. So perennial means it will grow and come back every year as long as favorable conditions occur. Indeterminate means that it can grow vegetatively and reproductively at the same time, unlike crops like wheat or corn that grow vegetatively and then they cease growing vegetatively and then shift into reproductive mode, and after that they're done. So corn is more of an annual. It flowers one time, and after that the plant dies and it produces its seed. Cotton, as long as we have favorable conditions, it will keep on growing into a perennial plant. So this is in the tropical areas of the country in Central America. This was actually on my honeymoon, and my wife was a little annoyed that I stopped and took a picture of every cotton plant that it was. But this plant is about 20, 25 feet tall. Now we never see that occur in North Carolina. So they never have a freeze in this part of the world or killing frost. So it'll continue on with its perennial nature and indeterminate nature and grow into really a small tree. But we don't see that occur here. So the way we manage it here, we manage it more of a determinate annual. Okay, we try to compress that production into a given season so that we can harvest the land. All right, so it all starts with the seed. The cotton seeds are fairly small, but they're easy to identify. And it'll sprout, and normally we like for things to warm up where we have 50 heat units with a 60-degree minimum for more than 5 days or more before we plant. So usually that's going to be maybe the last week of April, most likely the first week of May when you see cotton planted. Now the day of planting influences when it'll start hitting the growth stages later that are important to bees. All right, so this is a merged seedling. Usually you'll see that within a week of planting. And most folks refer to these as leaves. So they'll say that's two-leaf cotton. That's actually incorrect. These are the cotyledons. So cotton being a dicot species, that means it has two cotyledons. Those are essentially the two halves of the seed. They're not real leaves. So the job of these two leaves is to provide nutrients and energy to get that seedling growing until photosynthesis and other things can take over like it does for other plants. So I'll stop right here and I'll talk about this just for a little bit. All right, so cotton is a crop that's very attractive to a lot of insect pests. All right, and farmers in general, these chemicals that they spray to manage these pests are extremely expensive. So in a perfect world, we would not have to make any applications, any kind of pesticide applications at all. But when they do, it is based on recommendations based off of research, replicated research, on a chart that's similar to this. So what we have here is what we call an economic threshold and then an economic injury level. So as a pest population starts to increase, we want to make or prevent that population from reaching the economic injury level. And so therefore we take action somewhere between this threshold, which is defined. So, we send out cotton scouts and they find a certain number of pest damage or a certain number of insects. That would be that economic threshold, and that's the point at which a grower would need to treat before they hit this economic injury level. All right, so all of that is based off of replicated research. So they don't do this just for the fun of it, especially given the cost of some of these chemicals. All right, the first insect pest we have in cotton occurs at this stage. So remember, these are not true leaves. The first true leaf is going to arise from the middle of those two cotyledons, and that's a very susceptible stage for an insect called thrips, both singular and plural. It's always called thrips. So thrips can cause a lot of damage to a cotton plant. Gives these leaves a shredded look. Can hurt yields, 1 to 200 pounds per acre, which is significant to a grower. They're a real tiny insect. They're almost a little bit bigger than a flea, and they look kind of like a flea. The good news is, in regard to thrips, is there's nothing in a cotton field at that point in time that would attract a honeybee. So the only concern we would have is drift on some neighboring beehives or something like that. Now, farmers have adapted to this pest in other ways. You're starting to see, especially over the last 10 to 15 years, a lot of cover crops being planted. This is one we call high biomass rye. They grow the rye pretty tall, 6, 7 feet tall, roll it over, kill it with herbicides, and you end up with this real thick mat of residue on top of the soil. And then your cotton will emerge, wherever we plant it between that, okay? The reason we're doing this is not only for retention of soil and prevent erosion and retaining water and things like that, but this clouds or distorts the vision of those thrips. So thrips are attracted to the contrast of green tissue versus bare soil. And this cover crop like this just distorts that, so they don't know really where to go. So it tends to lessen the problem, prolongs the time in which we hit this economic threshold that you remember me talking about. And hopefully less sprays. So beyond that first true leaf, just an interesting fact, is almost all the time going to be heart-shaped. Beyond that, every other cotton leaf is going to have more of a lobed appearance. But that first true leaf is going to be heart-shaped. And you're going to see that on top, but the second true leaf is going to arise from the bottom, and then after a few days, will extend above that first true leaf. So after the first true leaf, the rest of those leaves that you see developing on the plant increasingly become more attractive to honeybees. All right, so your first true leaf is heart-shaped. Those cotyledons, they will expand out. They won't stay on there all season long. They're more of a kidney shape or a bean shape. And then every other leaf above that is going to have this lobed appearance like you would normally see with the cotton plant. So in the terminal of the plant, that's essentially the top. That's the growing point. That's very attractive to a lot of insect pests, and that's where all the new, young, the fastest growing leaves are going to be developing. But what's interesting about a cotton plant, when we get to the back side of the leaf, what I'll show you a little bit later, is its nectaries, okay, which is very unique, unlike most other plants. So when we get to about 8-leaf cotton, and I'll show you what that looks like, we start seeing the fruit develop, which those will turn into cotton bolls, and that's ultimately what we like to harvest. Don't ask me why, but when that fruit first develops, it's called a square. It looks nothing like a square. I don't know who came up with that name, but that's essentially the flower bud before it blooms. All right? Then it blooms. It only stays open for 1 day. All right, but that's no concern to beekeepers, and I'll explain why. After that, the day it blooms, it'll be white. So if you ever ride by a cotton field, you'll see white blooms and pink blooms. If it's a white bloom, that means it opened that day. If it's pink, that means, if it's light pink, it probably bloomed yesterday. If it's real bright pink, probably 2 days ago. And then after that, it'll kind of wither down and it'll subside, and we refer to that as a bloom tag. It's kind of dried up and crispy. And then below that, if fertilization was successful, we have a developing cotton boll, which is what we want to harvest. So around 5 to 7 true leaves, this will be about anywhere right around 40 days after we plant in most years. That's when we start seeing these first squares, these first fruit develop, and they'll be real tiny. So they'll remain in that squaring stage for about 3 weeks until they bloom. Right? Then after that, depending on the season, I say around 50 to 60 days, but it can range from 40 to 80 days. From a bloom to an open boll. Open bolls is what we harvest. All right, so on the cotton plant, which we'll talk about this in a minute, the bolls on successive nodes of branches going up the plant are 3 days difference in age, with the older fruit being on the bottom of the plant and the younger fruit being on the top. And bees love them all, especially once they bloom. There's a lot of sugar flow going to that fruit, and that's when we see a lot of activity. But here, this is 8-leaf cotton. It doesn't even come up to my knee. And that's a tiny square that we start seeing right in that terminal bud there at the top. Now, bees aren't going to mess with it really at that stage. There's not much there for a bee to get, but it will grow fairly rapidly for about 3 weeks. And bees can feed on these developing fruit prior to bloom. They don't have to wait on blooming to occur. All right, so all these leaves on the cotton plant, there's 2 basic kinds of leaves, and I won't get into that, but they all have this lobed appearance. But if you look on the underside of these leaves, there's a little bump on that main primary vein from the petiole of the stem. It comes right up there. There's a little bump right there. And that is the nectary, okay, on that leaf. It's a good sugar flow content going to it. A lot of times later in the year, you'll turn over a cotton leaf, you'll see ants on it, for example. That's what they're doing. They're getting that nectar. They're trying to get that sugar from that nectar, okay? There are a few varieties that don't have these. They're bred not to for some reason. But that's very rare. I've seen one variety in my career that did not have any of these subtennial extrafloral nectars that you see there. Okay, so back to squares and cotton fruit. Hard to see in this picture, but you've got a real tiny square. It looks more like a pyramid. I wish they would just call it a pyramid. So it's a little tiny pinhead square, what we call, if you can barely see it. The match head is basically, if you peel apart the little leafy structures, the bud is about the size of a match head. Half grown, this is about a week, maybe 10 days. It'll be about the size of your thumbnail. All right, and that's the point where I really start seeing more and more activity from bees. And then we call this a candlestick, where you start seeing that floral bud come between those leafy structures. And that's right before it's going to bloom. And usually by 21 to 25 days it will bloom, depending on how hot it is during the summer. All right, so during that squaring phase, we have another insect pest. It's just so lovely for us cotton producers. These are called plant bugs. Real scientific, right? All right, these little critters are like a tiny stink bug. If you know what a stink bug looks like, they're real tiny. They move a lot, and they're very, very difficult to control. So we can go and scout these fields one day, and we might find 1 or 2, and within 2 or 3 days, they're a real big nightmare for a cotton producer. So they're a pain to stay on top of. And they feed on these cotton fruit. Can destroy it very, very easily. So beekeepers, you've all heard of the neonicotinoids, right? Those chemistries are primarily targeting plant bugs, all right? Honestly, they're some of the safest chemicals we use, and they're not much of a concern unless we have drift problems, all right, which we'll talk a little bit about that in a few more slides. So as cotton develops, there's 2 main kinds of branches. I'm not going to get too scientific here, but the ones on the bottom we call a vegetative branch. If we were to tear that off and hold it up, it's got its own terminal, and it's got reproductive branches coming off of it. It basically looks like its own cotton plant without a root system. So all the other branches are ones we call reproductive branches. Those were the ones where the fruit are mounted directly to it. So the ones on the bottom of the plant are your oldest ones, and closest to the main stalk, they're also the oldest. So from this bowl here that you see to the next branch up, that bowl right there, this one up here is 3 days younger than this one. Now on the same branch, those are 6 days difference in age. So this one here is 6 days older than this bloom. All right, so on and so forth. So as long as cotton is blooming, you can kind of gauge how old some of those bulbs are. So the ones closest to the main stalk, you see that blooms probably within the last 4 days, and that bloom is withered down to what we call a bloom tag. And now we see this one blooming. It'll only be that way for a day. And then tomorrow it will be more of this hot pink look. okay? And after that, it dries down. So this is the one slide that's most interesting to beekeepers. The flower parts of a cotton plant and the functions that it has. Interestingly enough, a honeybee does not really care to get inside of a cotton bloom. One, it's only open for a day, so there's not much time for them to feed in there. The sugar content inside the bloom is actually really low. There is a little bit in there. But primarily, the pollen that you see developing on these anthers, they're very large grains, really sticky, so bees can't really pack them into the pollen sacs very effectively. Now, if they crawl in there, they'll get some pollen on them, but they usually don't mess around inside the bloom. So early in the morning, you see this bloom open. And cotton is a self-pollinated plant. It does not require pollinators to successfully fertilize it. So by midday or the end of the day, that bloom's going to start collapsing, and then you will start seeing it go through the color changes. So it'll be light pink that day and probably early the next morning, probably hot pink by the end of day 2. And after that, it kind of withers down. So basically, the pollen here will travel down this tube, down to the ovary or the ovules, which is the cotton seed. But this ovary here is what becomes a cotton bulb, and that's the harvestable portion of the plant. So all this will kind of wither away, and then you have a developing bulb underneath that gets larger and larger. So this is the most important part of the bloom, is not actually in the bloom. You got interbracteal nectaries, so these little leafy structures on the outside of the bloom are called bracts. So you have some inside there that are some nectaries, and then the subbracteal nectaries, which I'll show you a little bit better how they look. So this is an open bloom. You know, that the center there will be more of a cream color, and then after that you'll see the color changes. So prior to bloom, you'll see that, we call that a candlestick once it gets a little bit larger, but that's the inside of a square. It's not really showing up on this slide, but if you look right there, that little dot, that's your interbracteal nectaries. So you do see a little bit of bee activity in there. The one I most commonly see are the subbracteal nectaries. Okay? That's on the outside of the bloom and these bracts. You'll see that dark spot there. When it turns darker colored like that, that means it's being used. All right, so bees have accessed that before. So there's one on the bowl. There's one on a brand new white bloom. You can see that bees have been feeding on it. So once that nectary becomes visible to a bee and they can easily find it, it doesn't have to be blooming before the bee can access it and start getting sugar from it, or nectar. All right, so that can occur probably 2 weeks prior to bloom. For us in North Carolina, we typically like to see blooms around July 1. And blooming varies from year to year, but it can last till mid-August or even late August if you have some late planted cotton. By around Labor Day, you should see it subside. Now, if we have a very dry August, for example, you'll see all this just shorten up real fast. So it's to our advantage to keep getting periodic rains to keep the plant moving and keep it blooming. All right, so this is a pink bloom. You look there, you can see the nectary, and it's not been accessed very much yet for whatever reason. They just haven't found it. Okay, so but every one of them has that. And if you actually turn it over on the bottom side and just peel it off, there should be 3 on any individual cotton bowl or flower or square. They all have 3 there. Okay, sometimes 4, but most of the time it's going to be 3. And its peak activity for the sugar flow is going to be in the afternoons, usually between 2 and 4 o'clock. That's when, as long as we have good soil moisture, you'll see a good sugar flow, a good nectar flow going throughout the plant and into those developing bowls. So cotton lint, just a fun fact, is predominantly almost all cellulose. So if you remember back to high school chemistry, any word that ends in "ose" is a what? Sugar. That's exactly right. So we have glucose, sucrose, fructose, all these others. Cellulose, or cotton fiber, is actually one of the very few examples in nature where we can see a fiber, and that's actually a single cell. Okay? It's almost, if we have if we need treatment for stink bugs, see a lot of pyrethroids used during that time. These are somewhat hit and miss. We can pretty much count on having a problem with them at some point during the season, but they're not a terrible pest in most years. So when we get around Labor Day, that's when things start to subside for both the cotton producer and the beekeeper. Once you see this yellow tinge or this reddish tinge in the leaves, basically that's a sign of the boll load or the number of bolls on that plant. It's just straining those leaves for sugar and other nutrients, and it's really bogging down the plant, and chlorophyll, the green material in leaves, starts to break down. And technically speaking, that would be anthocyanins reflect a red color. So that's what we have left, is once chlorophyll breaks down, is the anthocyanins. Just like leaves turn, to different colors in the fall. Same thing happens in the cotton plant, but really not due to cool weather, it's more due to just exhaustion from trying to support all the developing bolls. And likewise with the bolls, we normally see this sometime in August or around Labor Day, depending on when it was planted. The oldest ones are going to open first, here at the bottom. And when they start cracking open, there's really no more sugar flow going to those developing bolls at that point, no moisture flow at all. So really when they pop open, all we needed to do is just dry out. But at this point, you might have some bees feeding on some of these on top, but here at the bottom, they're no longer of any interest to a honeybee at that point, just simply because there's no sugar flow. So another reason that we need to keep in mind that farmers don't want to make unnecessary sprays is because there's always a response from Mother Nature, okay? So we don't want to treat if we don't have to. One, because it's extremely expensive. And imagine some of the treatments like for bollworms, for example, that's $20 an acre. Well, if you have 1,000 acres, that's one spray is $20,000 right out of your pocket. So, growers don't want to do that if they don't have to. But this is another pest called spider mites. Usually we see that during bloom, but usually during dry periods, for example. But if we make any kind of unnecessary insecticide spray, this can happen. You would take care of one pest, but we flare another one. All right, so we want to avoid that if we possibly can. There's another one in cotton that's bad for the producer, but it's actually really good for a beekeeper. Those are aphids. Now, aphids can get on a number of different plants. They're sucking insects. They get on the underside of leaves and they kind of suck the juices out and excrete this stuff we call honeydew. Well, bees love that because it's basically just sugar material coating the underside of these leaves. It's real bad for the plant and the cotton producer, but fairly good for the beekeeper. All right, so again, can be a side effect from unnecessary or over-aggressive insecticide sprays that can flare aphids sometimes. So another reason we don't want to make unnecessary sprays. The worst thing, in my opinion, for both the cotton producer and the beekeeper is this, and that's severe drought. And we had quite a bit of it last year, especially in July. So you can see these leaves starting to wilt. That's under heat stress and water stress. There's no water flow going from the roots up through the main stalk to these leaves. They're essentially exhausted and they're drying up. And as such, what will happen is that the terminal or the top of that plant will temporarily cease growing. And when that happens, you'll see what bolls are on the plant or what squares are on the plant. They'll try to bloom, and that'll be it. Once that white bloom catches the top of the plant, it makes it very difficult to recover, even when we have rains. So what that can cause is all these different fruit, whether they're squares or blooms or bolls, to shed. So the plant only can keep what it can to survive. So it's going to try to retain the bolls or the fruit that has got the most energy invested in already. So usually they're going to be 2 weeks or younger, 2 weeks or older fruit that they're going to hold on to. And they're going to get rid of everything else, just trying to keep use the resources they have and keep feeding a handful of them. So we see this a lot of times, and it's not uncommon to see some degree of it, especially in August when the plant can only hold so much, even if it is raining. But if we start seeing this in July, then that's a problem, and usually you're going to see it coinciding with drought. So, kind of a recap, cotton, in my opinion, is an excellent source of nectar. Makes really good honey. It crystallizes quick. Does anybody know why it crystallizes quick? Very high in glucose, okay? Now, what you don't want to see is it crystallizing in the hive, but I love cotton honey. And I've never had it crystallize in the hive, but we have other types of nectar coming in that their bees are making honey with, kind of offset that. But pure cotton honey, you can put it in a pot with some warm water and it'll go back into solution at least for a while. But very sweet, almost a detergent flavor. I've had some that's got a little bit of a spice kick to it, kind of like an afterbite, but it's very good in my opinion. So, in eastern North Carolina, unlike some of the parts in central North Carolina or even the mountains, we have a very good summertime nectar flow with cotton and also with soybeans. And in pockets, there's another crop we call clary sage. It's very limited acreage, but that makes good honey too, and it's a good nectar flow, but that's mainly going to be during the month of May. But for cotton and soybeans, that's July and August all the way to about Labor Day. So it's a very good nectar flow for the summertime that other areas just don't have. So again, bees don't necessarily go and target cotton pollen. It's just inconvenient for them. They can't really pack it into the pollen sacs very well. So the chances of insecticide residue transport back to the hive is actually very, very low. All right, so I get this all the time from beekeepers and cotton farmers, okay? Because I'm right here at the intersection of both. And just so you know, nearly all of my colonies are within 100 yards of cotton fields any given year. There's going to be cotton on one side of me in most every single year. So I work for cotton growers, but I'm also a beekeeper, and now I'm a commercial beekeeper, so every dime counts, and anybody else in the room that's a commercial beekeeper will tell you that. So I don't want to lose my bees either, and it's heartbreaking when that happens. But usually what I found is if you approach your neighboring cotton grower, just tell them that you have some beehives, and you would appreciate him going through a couple of extra simple steps where you both could benefit. And it's usually best handled that way. If a cotton grower, for example, if you approach him and you're real alarmed or your demeanor is very alarming to him, he's probably just not going to tell you much or talk to you. But if you approach him just like you would want to be approached, most of the time we can work something out. So with a few precautions taken, should be no surprise that insecticides do kill insects, okay? So at most, if it's properly positioned, your foragers are going to be the ones that are most at risk. So liberally, I say 30%. I think that's a fair number. But they're not all going to be in a cotton field. They're not always going to be there at the exact same time, for example. So I still think this figure is a little bit liberal. But it'll mainly be your foragers, all right, that are at risk for any kind of insecticide spray. One of the best things you could ask your neighboring cotton producer to do is make his insecticide applications close to sunset. It doesn't have to be after dark per se, but closer to sunset or after 4 or 5 o'clock, when that nectar flow in cotton tends to subside for the day, okay? And hopefully with low wind. That's the part that really scares me, is wind blowing directly to my hives or to my apiary, okay? All right, so the reason I say that is, here's a link right here that basically lists nearly all the insecticides we deal with, and it gives you a figure called a RT25. And that's basically the re-entry period for a honeybee, all right? And that link right there has them listed for several of them. So it helps if you know what insecticides they're using and when. But if you do that, What you'll find is some of the most common ones that are used. Their RT25 is, in many cases, less than 12 hours. So, if he makes a spray in the evening time, by the next morning, most of that residue is long gone. Now, that's not always the case. It depends on some pests and some chemistries. But most of the time, it's really not much to be afraid of, okay? And then on cdems.net, that's essentially a link there that you can find every label. So a lot of times what we see is trade names, like, Buccaneer, which is a knockoff Roundup, for example. Things of that nature, but if you go to CDMS, you can look up a trade name and find the chemical name for the same thing. All right, so it's also important to understand just some of this terminology, like LD50, that's lethal dose 50. At what point does it kill 50% of the population? All right, so these are toxicology terms that are used for not only honeybees, but for mammals and all these other things. So for a pesticide to be approved by the EPA, it takes about 10 years and about $250 million from start to, when I say start, that's discovery of a compound. And it goes through a lot of scrutiny, from lab tests to cage tests to field trials. And if it meets all those check marks, then you get a label. And that process is about 10 years, okay? It's the same thing for honeybees. So like some of the control measures we use for varroa mite, for example, we can't get them overnight. They have to go through all these different tests. So it's about $250 million, 10 years from start to finish, if it makes it through all the hoops and hurdles. And they're pretty strenuous on those guidelines. And even such, what we're seeing on a lot of these products is you'll have a statement really about pollinators or specific to honeybees on those labels that instruct the user when they can use them, when they can't use them, things of that nature. Most of you are familiar with bee check. In my opinion, you can relocate hives. The best thing you can do is keep your colony healthy. All right, and we can lose bees, and trust me, I know you can lose bees in a lot of different ways. But it's not really always the pesticide's fault. Okay, if we keep a healthy hive, like in the instance, say we do kill every one of our foragers, a healthy hive can quickly regenerate new ones. All right. So if you have an issue where all of a sudden there's a sudden death of a colony, for example, NCDA is there to help you with that. And they'll come and investigate it, okay? And they can determine real quickly with some residue tests whether pesticides are to blame or not, all right? You go to that link right there, and it's got some information about that. What you don't need to do is talk about it and complain for 2 weeks and then call them, all right? They have to be able to access that really, really quickly. So if you see a problem that you think pesticides might be involved, go ahead and contact them right then, and they'll come out and they can take some of the dead bees and do some residue tests, for example. All right, so I think as beekeepers, we need to approach this with some common sense, without being too emotional. Now, bees are kind of like our pets, we want them healthy, and we tend to be very disgruntled when something goes awry. I know I am, all right? But understand this, it may not be the pesticide's fault. It may be something else going on, and that can be investigated. So there's no need to be alarmed. Now, if you look at social media and all this kind of stuff, you would think the world's coming to an end. And I can tell you, especially with the neonics and the pyrethroids and all this stuff that we see, if they were as problematic as social media makes it out to be, then there would be no honeybees. I certainly wouldn't have any, because most of my colonies well, last year were within 10 feet of a cotton field. That's a little bit too close to comfort. But, if you back off, I've heard folks say 50 feet. Mine are about anywhere 50 to 100 yards away. And as long as the wind's not blowing right to them, they're fairly safe. And I've never had an issue as long as we've done that. That direct contact, i.e. drift right onto the face of my hives, that's what concerns me the most. That's gonna be more common with an aerial application, so if you go back to B-check and all that, make sure you're registered in there. If you have a pilot in your area, make sure that he knows that you're there, okay? Now, I see stuff on social media all the time, and you know, this was like last September or something like that. Somebody was extremely excited about an aerial spray being made. Well, it turns out it was nothing more than fertilizer. And that's not gonna hurt a bee at all, okay? But just because a plane's flying over spraying something doesn't mean it's an insecticide, but it could be. All right, there's several ways to deal with this. Like if your neighboring grower tells you he needs to make a spray, there's some things we need to take responsibility for too. These are some things I've not necessarily tried, not in all cases. The tarps or nets putting over hives, if you've got 3 or 4 or less, that may be good, but you need to give them enough area where they can get out of that hive and ventilate, make sure they have good water if you were to do that. You don't want to restrict them too much. I don't prefer this method. I've heard of folks closing off their hives, especially if they got a screen bottom board. In my opinion, especially in real hot periods during July and August, that can be very risky to the entire colony, not just your foragers. You know, so prior to that, we were only worried about our foragers. Now we're putting the entire colony at risk, because we got to be really careful. I would not do that on a hot day, especially with a large colony. This, in my opinion, is the best thing. Position hives in a protected area. So a lot of times that can be on the other side of a hedgerow from a cotton field. And it doesn't have to be that far away, 50 yards, 100 yards, whatever makes you comfortable. Just so we avoid that direct spray drift or contact between insecticide and our hives. So again, healthy hives can crank out new foragers, and there's things we need to do, like stay on top of our mites and feed them if we have to. Some other real good information, in my opinion, is Honeybee Health Coalition. A lot of you have heard of that. They've got a list of BMPs, best management practices there for bees. Purdue has got a really neat resource. It's called The Complex Life of the Honeybee. If you haven't read it, I would encourage you to do so. And that's all I have. I'll be happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Your experience, how likely do the farmers or the pesticide sprayers actually look at drip watch or anything like that?
If they know about it, the best thing to do is if you have one there, don't assume he's looking at drift watch. That gets mentioned, but it's not front and center of their training. Okay, so it gets mentioned, but when you get busy and you've got 1,000 or 3,000 acres to go over, that's an easy thing to overlook. But if he knows that they're there and you go and tell him that they're there, most of the time he'll remember it. Or he'll just hopefully position that field to where he's doing it later in the day. That would be the ideal scenario.
But in your opinion, it's not communicated and pushed as probably as it could be.
It's part of the pesticide training, if I'm not mistaken. So for the pesticide credits, it does get mentioned in pretty good detail there. But if they don't know they're there, then they're probably not going to look. So if they know that they're there, then they'll probably go to the map and check and make sure there's none other ones around that's maybe hidden or something like
One of
that.
the things I just wanted to know, in your opinion, if it was more of a grassroots thing or if it was actually being pushed.
It's being, I know it gets talked about. Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're aware of it, but they may not be aware of your hives. Yeah.
Aerial sprayers use it a lot more.
Yeah, now they're, I think, required to,
I think so.
yeah, for aerial sprays of insecticides. Now, it could be fungicides they're spraying or something like that, and in those cases, it doesn't matter.
I was thinking of the southern states in the field.
Yeah. Now, that's another thing that, you know, they're part of, they have the pesticide training. Any applicator does, whether it's commercial or private. But when you're talking about a dealer doing it on behalf of a grower, they really may not know. I mean, your grower is more likely to know about it than the dealer. Now, the dealer can still look it up, but it wouldn't hurt to make sure he's aware too. Yes, sir.
Questions. I just moved here from New Jersey a little while ago. And in North Carolina, do they have, I think they do from the general conversation we were just having, are accredited?
Yes, to different degrees. So you know, like you can have a private pesticide license, you can have a commercial one, then there's certain levels. But there's one that's a pesticide consultant, it's not necessarily an applicator issue. But one who advises, like a crop consultant, would have to have that license to advise a grower to spray and when to spray.
Is that based on the chemical they're applying?
I think if they're a farmer at all, really, they need to have it. And there's some unrelated to bees altogether, mainly dealing with herbicides. So there's a training specific to auxin herbicides that they have to go to. And I mean, it was a challenge this year with the pandemic and all, but like just being on the Zoom, they had to keep the camera on and enter their license number and all that. I mean, they document that stuff very, very closely.
So you would be neonicotinoids now, they would be certainly certified by the state to do that.
Right.
Okay.
That's correct.
The second question is there a call list in North Carolina, maybe by the Beekeeping Association in North Carolina, where somebody would go to that's going to do a pest control, and put down pesticides, and they're obligated to call those people in a certain radius from where they're going to do it, notify them they're going to do it, and when they're going to do it.
Are you talking more for farmers or are you talking more for like spraying mosquito
A
sprays?
beekeeper that's on this list. If somebody, for instance, where I live, they might have been spraying for mosquitoes.
Right.
And they would call me and say, tomorrow night at 6 o'clock, we're spraying for mosquitoes on your street. You know, there might be farms down the road from me, and they're spraying for something else. They would just keep us in the loop. They would tell us what they're doing. And they would always do it, to your point,
Yeah.
after dusk, before morning, early morning, because of these residual, you know, times.
Right, right. And I hear a lot of that about, especially about mosquito sprays in municipal areas. I think through bee wash, they're supposed to contact or drift wash, but are you aware of anything, Brandon?
Other than the drift watch program, that's the only one I'm aware of where like a beekeeper actually registers their hives and that program is used, but I'm not sure. I know some of the I think some towns are, I know like around here, I think some towns are better than others about notifying, you know, communities when they're going to treat and things like that for mosquitoes, for example, and things like that. But that's about the only program I'm aware of that sort of ties the two together.
And I'm not aware of anything where they would call you specifically. They might post it on a forum or on a website or something like that. But but I'm not familiar. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm just not familiar with it.
When Matthew went through, I think, our club with the state club was emailing their members.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, okay, good.
But that wasn't the statement. It was because, I guess
Individual
because
club.
that ag center here.
Yeah. So, but in the case for cotton, and if they're growing cotton, chances are they're growing soybeans and all these other things. It just does not hurt to get to know the grower, approach them in a polite way, just like you would want to be approached, and try to work together where you can find some common ground where you will both benefit. So as beekeepers, it's our benefit to be near cotton, in my opinion. I love being near cotton for honey reasons, but I don't want to lose my bees either. So, I mean, luckily in my situation, there's 3 farmers, and I know them all, known them my whole life. And you know, a polite conversation takes away a lot of headache.
Question regarding the relationship between honeybees and cotton. So, is it beneficial for cotton to have honeybees pollinate?
That's a really good question. So cotton is self-pollinated. It doesn't necessarily require pollinators. There is some data, I want to say out of Auburn, and it's old data, that suggests that in certain situations it was kind of a mix. Like in some years it seemed to benefit to have bees near it, in other years it didn't. And it wasn't real clear as to why. My personal opinion, and this is strictly just my opinion, is if there's a scenario where pollination is adversely affected by, say, weather, like drought or prolonged cloudy, cool weather where the anthers that produce the pollen don't grow adequately or something like that. So those bowls or those flowers have trouble pollinating, then perhaps in those situations they can. But the common understanding of it is no, it doesn't. You don't have to. I mean, if you had no honeybees around, we tend to see it do just fine.
You know, like nurseries and all, if it's not been visited and dark and all like that.
Right.
If that helps the sugar flow to have it being hit or something like that.
No. It's more about the pollination of it. And basically the pollen get from the anthers to the top of that tube. I mean, if something can help it do that, then where otherwise it couldn't do it on its own, then perhaps. But, yeah, that's a good question. It's a very good question. Any other questions? All right.
Question.
Yes, sir.
What is the function of those, nodules? I mean, how do they benefit, why does the plant die?
I do not know.
I mean, it just seems like just.
I do not. I really don't
Is
know.
it a relief valve of some sort or what?
Not that I'm aware. It just does, as far as I know. But I really don't have an answer for that. I know in some germplasms they'll breed it out of that to
So it's not.
lessen problems maybe from other pests, but that's not necessarily issue here.
I wonder what biological function it serves that's on the plant.
I don't know. I really don't know. It's just part of it. A very good question. Yes. I'm gonna investigate that. All right. Well, I do thank you.
Thank you.
You may.
All right, thank you, Guy. And again, guys, I just want to, keep that in the front of your mind. Guy's done a lot for us in the club. He's a great resource to have, as you can see. Wealth of knowledge when it comes to commercial beekeeping and pollination services. And we're very thankful to have him here. And again, thankful for his donation of the hive that we have now, right? Big takeaway for me, guys, is to have a personal relationship with your farmer or whoever you're going to put your bees on their land with. Just keep a line of communication with them, so hopefully, they'll be courteous enough to tell you if they're going to spray pesticides or anything on their crops and give you the heads up if you're going to be spraying the day or that. So the next thing we wanted to get into, I felt like, we may have skipped a few things when we first got in here. It's been so long since we've been in person again that I've lost track of who's who, and there's so many new faces that I kind of wanted to go around and ask, if you feel so obliged that if you're a new member, would you mind standing up and tell a little bit about yourself, why how long you've been keeping bees, how many you got, what your intentions are. I'm not putting any pressure on anybody, but if you feel so obliged, please, if you're a new member, would you mind just raising your hand? Yeah, sure.
I'm Wayne Harden. I've always had an interest in it a couple of years. I've just never had the chance to do it. So I'm in the very beginning stages. I don't have any bees or anything yet. I just have a property to put it on. I'm just at the beginning stages doing everything now.
Nice. Well, fantastic. Yeah, lots of new beekeepers here and plenty of veteran beekeepers that can point you in the right direction if you have any questions. Al here teaches a class. I'm not sure if you're familiar or not, but he does a great job of explaining new topics to new beekeepers and can help you out a lot if you need help.
It's actually the reason I found out you have a meeting tonight. You just have to message me back and say, we're having a meeting tonight. And I said, shoot, I'll be there.
You're great. We're glad you're here. Thanks for coming. Anybody else want to raise your hand? Go ahead.
I'm Daniel Blackman. I got my first package of bees about 10 days ago.
Nice. Right in the middle of it. How are they doing so far?
I don't know yet. John will come out here and make a little bit done. I think I got some issues with this.
That's normally the case. You learn as you go. It's a hands-on, trial and fire in a lot of ways. So, welcome and thank you for coming. I'm glad you're here. Yes, sir.
What means that they are?
Put these into 2 or 3 different categories, like for instance, we're going to do a web page, we're going to do social media, and then we're going to do a newsletter. So if you don't mind, just with a show of hands, could you please tell me if you prefer to get your information through email? Does anybody, you prefer email? Email, we got a good show of folks that still enjoy to go through email and get their information. Great, okay, good, because we want to make sure we're, utilizing those methods efficiently. What about social media? Does anybody feel comfortable enough using social media to get their announcements? We got to get a few good show of hands. Good. Now, does anybody go to the website? Is anybody a big website person? We got a few. Okay. Great. All right, good. We're just kind of trying to get an idea of where we need to funnel our attention towards so that we reach the most amount of people we possibly can. We're trying to branch out. This pandemic has forced us into areas to try different things. YouTube, Facebook, newsletter, Zoom, all those things have been used by the club. Hopefully, we don't want to exclude anybody, so we'll continue doing the newsletter. I'm glad people use that and are enjoying it. So, thank you. So back to beekeeping. One thing we do try to offer everybody at meetings is a beekeeper's corner or a beekeeper's basics. So, for those of you just starting out, we try to give you just a heads up of what is the best practice to be doing at this point in time. And I think I'm saying that he may have actually stepped out on me. So, yeah, no. But also along with that, we also do what we like to call a ag report. And Brandon here, he's our representative from the Ag Center here. And I want y'all to please, could y'all give him a hand as well? He's allowed us to come in here again. He's been our point of contact with the state, just, what's their communication, what's the regulations on us meeting in person again. He really is the one that kind of led the way for us getting back in here in person. So we're great to have him on our side here to be a part of the bee club. But one thing he did do prior to us going into quarantine, he gave us an ag report of what's blooming, what crops you're seeing right now, and how everything's going on the agriculture side. So we're going to give him a moment to just give you an update on those things right quick.
It's good to see everybody. A few new faces out there, but again, I'm Brandon Parker. I'm the commercial horticulture agent here in Johnston County at the Extension Office. Probably saw me up here running around earlier, and I guess like everything else, I pulled the stuff out of the closet earlier, and I saw a sign-in sheet from the last meeting we had in person. It was February of 2020. It's like, God, it's been a long year, but it seems like it was just a month or two ago. So time has flown, and I guess our equipment has not been used in so long, or I forgot how to use it. We're having technical problems and couldn't get the microphone to work. Batteries are dead, and all the portable mics because they've been sitting there a year and haven't been used. But anyway, we got it going. But yeah, so as far as even though it seemed like the world shut down, things kept going on the agriculture side. Even right here at home, last year was a pretty good year for most crops. We were wet for most part of the summer. Guy mentioned that dry period we had right in late July, early August, and then it fell into rain into the fall, and it didn't quit raining until about 2 weeks ago, I think. But we've got off to a good start so far. I feel like this spring has been a more normal spring than we've had in 4 or 5 years. Our strawberry crop is a little bit later than what we've been accustomed to the last 3 years. We've been, having strawberries available in late March, first week of April. This year, we really haven't, in the last 6 days is the first strawberries I've seen picked. So that's one thing I wanted to put a word out. If you're looking for some fresh strawberries, they are available now. Most every grower I know around the county that has got strawberries has started picking it the last week. So those are available. Get out and get those while you can. We've had right most corn planted. Haven't seen any cotton planted yet. Like he mentioned, a few soybeans getting ready to go in the ground, and no sweet potatoes yet. They've bedded the seed that they grow the plants from, but it'll be 3 or 4 weeks before we start setting the sweet potatoes. But a lot of produce going in the ground. Guys that do retail and wholesale produce, which is a lot what I work with, they are planting pretty hard right now, and some of them get a little worried. They're showing upper 30s for like Wednesday night, Thursday morning, Friday night this week. So gonna get a little cool on us, but, maybe we'll be okay. On bare ground, most of the time, you know, on like a tilled field, it's gotta get, it's not gonna frost on a bare soil like that, because that soil's releasing a lot of heat. We've had a lot of warm weather already, so we should be okay. But, a few things I just wanted to mention real quick. You may have seen these little flyers right here on the back with some Joco Grows bumper stickers. That is a sort of a ag awareness campaign that we have started in Johnston County, working with the Extension Office, a group of farmers and agribusiness owners, and the Johnston County Visitors Bureau. And this has been going on this started up, the group started meeting before the pandemic started, and then that kind of hindered us last year. But, you know, you don't have to go far. You can leave here and go a half mile and see that our county is rapidly changing, and for better or worse, whichever way you agree with. But it's just sort of a way that we're trying to connect the people of Johnston County and the growth of Johnston County to the agriculture background that we have here. And, you know, we don't need to forget where we've come from and the things that provide us, you know, our everyday creature comfort, so to speak. But there are some bumper stickers back there. Y'all feel free to take those, some little window decals, and these little brochures. You'll see on the back, we do have some social media presence and things like that. And it is just, like I said, sort of a promotional piece for agriculture and farms in Johnston County. And one other thing, you know, Ashton mentioned we've been busy, and John and Jim and things with the building and the club hives this past year, you know, that kept things going. We also sold, the board knows most of this, but we sold this jar of honey here at the office like this past, I don't know, a couple months, 3 or 4 months or so. This honey came from you guys' hives that we've had back here at the Ag Center. We extracted this maybe last spring or summer. They got it bottled. We had a nice label put on it. It's got Johnston County Beekeepers Association, local wildflower honey, and the phone number here at the Ag Center. And we also put the Joco Grows Agriculture sticker on the back that I was just mentioning about it. We sold these here at the Ag Center. I think we had about 50 jars or so. 52. Well, I think we're down to like 2 or 3 jars, so they have got gone. Even with very limited traffic coming in the last, you know, 3, 4, 5 months, we've been able to move those. So that's been a good piece to have and promotes the bee club and things like that here for people coming in, and hopefully we can get some more honey soon and get some more for sale. But I appreciate y'all doing that. That's been good. I didn't realize it was all gone until last week.
Raise the prices on the last week.
I know, it's getting thin. I have to have a little bit more on it. But I wanted to mention that as sort of a promotional piece that the club has been doing, and here at the office, and being able to move and sell honey pretty quick. But that's all I've got. And if y'all do see me run out the door or disappear, y'all just lock up. I've got a baby due and about the due date's April 26th, so any minute, because, you know, we're down to next Monday is the due date. So I may be here next month, I may not, just kind of depends, but
Don't drop the baby.
I won't. Looking forward to that.
Take good pictures for us.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. Yeah, guys, don't, please just remember Brandon, you know, he's done a lot for us this year, and we're very thankful for what he's done. He's let us out here on the grounds on the weekend. He puts in a lot of effort for us. I'm pretty sure his phone blows up on a regular basis from us in the club. So we're thankful that he's helped us as much as he has. And, you know, what he was mentioning about the honey, guys, that's why we stress so much about our apiaries, and it's very important to us to make sure those are in good health, because it is a revenue source for us. And if anyone was on the call, we did present that budget, guys, and it is a big part of how we get funding here in the club is through those sales. So, you know, it is very useful, and we utilize those to provide for our club. And one thing also we wanted to mention is, you know, we're in the process of trying to get some events together for club participation. We do have some, you know, if you're not aware, we do have the apiary checks out here at the Ag Center almost weekly. You know, I would say bi-weekly. You can come out, you can get hands-on training, see our hives, get involved with someone who's very experienced, and he provides a lot of knowledge for you real quickly. So, and as a matter of fact, I want to go ahead and just, John, if you want to go ahead and give our beekeepers basics, that would be great. Yep, short on this.
Can everybody hear me? Okay, I guess the first thing is everybody, who is not getting the Beekeeper's Corner and the monthly bulletins? Is there anybody that's not getting those? Okay, if you would get with Karen at the end of the meeting and make sure she has your correct email address, we'll make sure that you get those. I'm rude, I'm pointing. Okay. Apiary inspection, there is one this weekend. I will send out something with Meeting Genie, depending on the dart thrower's weather forecast. But we need to go in these hives because we did some splits last weekend. We've got queen cells. We need to make sure that we've got viable queens. So we'll be trying to go in those hives either Saturday or Sunday, depending on the weather. Okay, let's talk about the high points. Beekeeper's Corner, we've got a real compressed nectar flow this year. You know, we had such a late winter, and it was cold for so long, the nectar flow is very compressed. So you need to wash your supers, make sure that they don't run out of room. It's easy for it to happen, especially if you got a very strong hive. And that's the message from Ron Lassiter. So, if you don't have swarm traps up, it's swarm season. It's bad this year. They're out. We've had a lot of people. I think Ann Ennis told me she had a hive swarm at the end of February. So just be careful, watch your hives. I don't know if y'all saw last month's Beekeeper's Corner, but our 4-H, Miss Lily's Queen Carrot, they flew the coop and they didn't catch the swarm, so we went in and did a split, and they're up to 3 hives now. But anyway, that was several weeks ago. Mite loads. Anybody that's got an IPM board, there's no reason why you can't check for mites. You don't have to go in your hive. Clean your IPM board, put PAM or olive oil or some sort of oil on there, and come back in 72 hours and count the mites. If it's less than 30, you're probably good. If it's more than 30, then you need to go in and do an alcohol wash or a sugar shake. But putting it off is just delaying the problem. And what you're going to get into is, right now it's cool enough you can use formic acid to treat your hives. Formic Pro, Mite Away, you can use the 2-strip method or the 1-strip method. With Mite Away you can do it in 7 days with the 2-strip method. You know, and Formic Pro, if you do it 1 strip at a time, it's going to be a total of 20 days. But you don't want to be treating these hives when it's hot, because the bees don't like it and you have problems with queens. So, you know, if you need to treat, you need to treat. And formic acid is the only thing that's going to let you treat with Superzon right now. It's not legal to treat with Superzon with oxalic acid, and not only that, but it's not going to take care of your cat brood. If there's mites in there, it won't treat that. Apivar you can't do, or Apicard with your Superzon. So your window's slowly closing on you. And I'd say you want it below 80 degrees based on my experience. They do say 85, but I think you're pushing your luck. Your queen excluders need to be on now. You need to make sure your queen is below that excluder. Let's see. If you need drawn comb, this is the time of the year to get it because you got all the baby bees. They do a lot of wax production. So if you need to draw some comb, need to replace comb, now's the time to do it. As you're aware, the Clayton and the Ag Center apiary has been combined. We've moved the apiary from down the hill to over here on the side. We're allowed up to 12 hives out here now. It's much more accessible and easier to get to. We talked about drift watch. I would put my hive on drift watch just so you have a chance someone will see it and do something. And I'm no longer doing the nectar honey flow report. I've enlisted Mr. Phil Crump to help me with that. And the only thing I will say is do not share your phone number with him, because if he decides that you need to know something, it'll come through at 5:30 in the morning or at midnight, but you'll know it on text. So, okay, hive inspections. We're going to have some temperature extremes like we were just talking about. You need to be aware of it with hive inspections. You really don't need to go in when it's below 60 degrees unless you're going in for a particular reason. And if you have a plan. Also, we're going to see a lot of temperature variation over the next few weeks. It may get into the 90s, typically it does. And then we're going to have low temperatures. So you're going to have to plan for your hive ventilation, whether you've got your IPM boards in or out. So just keep aware of that. When you're doing your inspection, start with your IPM boards. That's going to tell you a lot about what's going on in the hives, because you'll be able to see where the bees mostly are working, and you see where they're not. You also can see mites sometimes. So start with your IPM boards, look at them, clean them, put them back in. I know some of you don't have IPM boards. That's your choice. And okay, queen laying pattern. Now's the time to be looking at how your queen's laying. You can get replacement queens. Queen's over 2 years old. Think about replacing her, because if she stops laying in the middle of next winter, then that hive's going to die. So it's best just to go ahead and replace that queen after 2 years. Swarm control. You get in your hives, it's full of brood. There's almost no eggs or larvae, but it's just wall-to-wall brood. You need to be looking for queen cells, because more than likely that hive has or will swarm. And the best solution there is probably do a split. Take your queen and a lot of the brood and move it over to another hive. The foragers are going to go back to the original hive. But if you don't do something, you're going to have a swarm, and you're going to lose that bees, you're going to lose the honey, and you're losing a lot of the nurse bees, because that's who's going to go with the swarm. So, also you can equalize your hives. If you got a weak hive and you got a real strong hive, take that brood from that weak hive, or from the strong hive, and put it in the weak hive. Try to build that hive up. I will say this: when you do splits, you're going to hurt your honey production, because now you've taken a good portion of your bees away. So just keep that in mind. There's no free lunch here. You've got a second hive, but you haven't gotten. You're going to hurt your honey production. On your super frames, you may need to check the board in, some empties. Pull the full cap frames, put them in your freezer, and then you can extract them at your heart's content. One thing you can do, if you don't know if the frames are, if the honey's cured at proper moisture level, is sometimes you just have to take them and shake them like that. And if that honey comes out, then it's still too wet. But if it stays in there, more than likely it's dry enough that you could extract it. Also, the Ag Center here, Crystal up front, can test your honey for moisture content, and it's free of charge. So if you got a question, you can get them to test it. Let's see. I'm just hitting the highlights here. If you do any extraction, which may happen in the next month, when you put your supers back on, put them on in the evening. That'll prevent rotting. Small hive beetles are still a problem. You need to go after them because it's carried over from last year. And I saw some packages with hive beetles in them. And let's see. One last thing is you can borrow a frame assembly jig here from the Ag Center. You can borrow extractors. You can borrow uncapping rollers, uncapping knives. Check them out up front. Take them home, do your extraction, and bring them back, no cost. Do you have any questions, comments? I'm yet to get a snide comment on the Beekeeper's Corner. It's upsetting me. I haven't even got one from Phil. I mean, I don't know what to say.
We're going to do the Beekeepers Anonymous page in this book.
I'm going to take this important question over here.
I don't usually use the IPM boards, but in order to check the mites, how long should I leave them in there?
If you use IPM boards, you would put them in for 72 hours and then pull them out and count them. And if it's less than 30, that would be the threshold. Just understand they don't perfectly correlate, but when we tested them when the apiary was over there, our mite loads were below 2% and the IPM boards correlated. So it's a guide. Okay, Jim?
John, you talk about treating bees. A lot of beekeepers out there bought packages. Would you comment on trees and packages, swarms, splits?
On the packages, hopefully they were treated before they left Georgia. But if you had to treat them, you could treat them with oxalic acid because there's no brood in them. And you can check out a vaporizer, a respirator, a battery here from the Ag Center. You'll have to go buy it from Al at Fuzzy Bee or Bailey's or order it from Dadant oxalic acid. They don't provide that. Just remember, oxalic acid is dangerous. If you breathe it, it can be deadly. As to swarms, also you can treat those with oxalic acid and before they have cap root. And what was the other, a split? A split you're going to need to treat with a different method if you're bringing cap root over. And more than likely that's going to be formic acid. But you need at least 10,000 bees to treat with formic acid. And if you're going to treat with formic acid, go to the NOS website and review their frequently asked questions, because there's some ventilation requirements on formic acid. Basically, your front needs to be open so that the bees can ventilate the hive properly. Did I answer everything, Jim? Any other questions? Snide comments, Phil? I don't know if I...
No, because I think it's fine.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, John. All right.
I got to ask them.
Well, I think this is the point in our meeting, where we go through, everybody should have got a ticket right at the beginning of the meeting. If you do, if you don't, please raise your hand. Anybody not get a ticket? All right, we normally go through, we try to pass out some door prizes, so we'll call a few of them out, and then if you hear your number called, just raise your hand and I'll bring it over to you.